My name's Jez Humble. I work at Google Cloud.
My name's Maryam. I work at Thought Machine.
So today, we're going to start, well, Maryam's going to introduce Thought Machine. Then we're going to talk about how to get started with improving quality at your org or on your product. We're going to talk particularly about metrics and how you take a metrics-driven approach to improving quality.
Thank you. So I work as head of quality at a fintech called Thought Machine in London. What our product is that we're trying to solve a core banking solution, which you see in a lot of traditional banks nowadays. The company started with trying to solve some machine learning problems, trying to educate the customers better, but they found that the real problem was extracting that data with transactions and so on. So we created a product called Vault. And some of our major clients are Lloyds, Standard Chartered, and Atom Bank so far. I've been in quality assurance for about 12, 13 years now, and I started as an SET, and then when I moved into a managerial role, this is what I was asked every time: can you please come and fix quality? When you are asked these questions, you're often just confused, okay, where do I start? What do you mean by please fix quality? I'm a big fan of trying to understand what those phrases mean, which people say. And what I've usually heard from my peers and teams is that it's because the clients are unhappy, or the releases are delayed, or the team is really stressed, and that's what we need to fix. But in doing so, we've noticed quite a few issues in our journeys. Jez, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think it's important to ask those questions as well, which is, I think, what you did when you went there, is like, what do you mean by quality? What do you need to fix? And we've seen people make mistakes when they think about how to improve quality. Sometimes we see people say, okay, let's stop and build a complete automated test suite from scratch. That's not a good idea, because it's really hard to do, and you're going to learn it by doing it. And you just can't stop for the weeks and weeks it's going to take to learn how to actually build a maintainable suite of automated tests. So it's much better to start with one and then evolve them over time, and then you're going to learn in the process of doing it. People often add a new process in order to make things better, and a new process tends to punish the innocent while actually not preventing the guilty from doing bad things, while just slowing everything down.
Something I've also noticed is that people actually silo the test teams. There was a very big company I used to work for a while ago, and they had a separate regression testing team, can you believe it? Which used to do a third week of regression after the team signed off after the sprint, and that was a classic problem, because by the time they found issues, it was far too late, and the team's context has switched in trying to solve the problems. So when you're asked to fix quality, where do you start? You want a plan. I read this book last year called Leading Quality by Ronald Cummings John and O.S. Peer, where they talk about all the steps you need to take. For anyone who's trying to get onto this journey, I'd highly recommend this book. And the first thing you do is try to create a vision statement. When I joined Thought Machine, so Thought Machine has been around for about 5.5 years now. It's a mid-level startup, about 300 people now, and we're going to scale up to 500 this year. And for startups, what happens initially is that you're just looking at deliver, deliver, deliver. Let's deliver quickly. Let's get the clients on board. And in that cost, time, and quality triangle, quality gets cut off. My role didn't exist in the company until late last year, and I was brought in to say, okay, we have all these issues now. Everything's quite chaotic. Can you please bring madness to the chaos? Also, something else I noticed was that we had a client services team and we had an engineering team. And when we talk about quality, like yesterday in your keynote, you were mentioning about thinking about your clients, thinking about your customers, but it's not always thinking about the people at the end of the food chain. It's also the people creating the products that are used in the food chain. And it's really important to look at your engineering teams and think about how you can assist them in being efficient. So this is the vision statement I came up with at Thought Machine. Assuring quality enables teams to drive for customer satisfaction at a sustainable pace. I repeat, assuring quality enables teams to drive for customer satisfaction at a sustainable pace. Something to note here is that I don't say quality assurance and I talk about assuring quality, which is also why I really enjoy the role I'm in. They talk about quality across the organization and not just engineering, which is something I find quite refreshing. The 3 items which you see in blue, those are the 3 themes that we tried to solve. Enabling teams is about quality in engineering. Customer satisfaction is about quality in delivery. And sustainable pace is about quality in process.
And so my observation looking at this was this looks a little bit like the agile story format, where as a I want, so that yay, and you kind of got like who are the people for whom this is important? It's the teams, and you've got a so that here. It's about customer satisfaction, and then there's what it is. It's about assuring quality.
Yep. So once you've come up with a vision statement to try and solve, understand where you're heading towards, what's your journey and your roadmap, what do you do next? You talk to your stakeholders. These are the people who will be outside of anyone having a quality assurance or tester title, trying to portray the same message and try and enable everybody else to think about quality. These are your CEOs, CTOs, your tech leads, your incident management teams, your release management teams, if you have testing teams. You really need to sit down with them and understand what are the problems that they're trying to solve. How do they know that quality was bad? What are the things they're seeing that the clients are reporting about? What's their code coverage like? Do they have the right processes in place? When you set up your Jira boards, are they actually having too many columns, for example, which is why it's a very long, arduous process to get something from inception to delivery, and so on and so forth. So these are the types of questions you can ask them.
And were you asking these questions before you came up with a vision statement, or did you come up with a vision statement first?
So when I joined, I came up with a vision statement, but at the same time, I was trying to identify who the key stakeholders were, i.e. who were the people who pitched for this role, because clearly they were quite interested in improving how we delivered better products to our customer. So you're thinking about improving quality, and one thing, this actually, we started this whole process of putting this talk together at CraftConf last year, because Maryam was interested in, how do you measure this stuff? And obviously, Nicole and me and the team in putting together the State of DevOps report, we have a lot of data and metrics and research on what actually works well. One of the most important of which is how you measure the performance of software delivery teams. These 4 metrics, which have come up over and over again, so I'm not going to reprise those, except to say this. If you're trying to get better, you need to know where you are. So it's important to know where you are on this. And if you're going to change something about the way your organization develops software, what you want to be checking is that what you're doing is impacting these metrics. So anytime you're making process improvement changes or developing capabilities or changing the way you work, you should be running experiments. Are the things I'm doing actually making these things better? And then in terms of what you do, again, here's the BFD, which you won't be able to read, but you can go to bit.ly/Dora-BFD and download it. These are the kind of things you should be thinking about in terms of what you actually do to improve. So which capabilities you're going to implement. How are you going to measure how well you're doing at implementing those capabilities? And how are you going to measure the impact of that work on software delivery performance? So when you're thinking about implementing a metrics-driven approach to improving quality, again, measure performance, come up with ideas for what you could do to improve performance, design experiments to test whether the things you're doing are actually working in terms of measuring how you're doing it, implementing them, and then also be thinking about measuring the impact of those things on software delivery performance. That's how to think about getting better at this stuff. So, as Jez just said, you want to try and identify what areas you need to improve quality in. There were quite a few things I found out as a result of those conversations with my stakeholders. But for the course of this talk, I'll restrict to release quality and product quality. Process quality is also something we can talk about later on, maybe in the discussion, but let's focus on the first two. So releases. As some of you may know, in a startup, it's only about releasing. I don't know what was released, what pull request went where, what version of code is deployed with which client environment, where are we with our versions in our environments, and so on. So when we had a release management team join early last year, the first thing they did was creating a visibility landscape, which I'll share in a bit. Other things which I've been tasked to do is that you need to visualize that when you release, how many of the issues are reported by the client services team and then by the clients. Because really, you want to find the maximum number of issues during development or in engineering teams, then lesser number of issues by the client services teams, and then even fewer issues reported as incidents by the clients. And that's how you would know that you're actually testing the right things in the right way. Other things, release notes, really important. I've worked in organizations where people have not paid attention to what content is in the release notes. When you're working on a customer deployable product, it's really important to state what are the features that they're going to get with every version of the code base. And not only what features they're going to get, it's really important to also see what are the known issues that exist in the product. A lot of companies feel that, oh my God, we can't tell them about this high impact issue yet because it's,
embarrassing.
What's the English word? Embarrassing. It's embarrassing and we don't want to look bad and how will we get more clients and so on and so forth. But it's about creating visibility, which is really important. Another thing which we're trying to also see is how easy is it to create our deployables, how quickly can we create them, and how quickly can we actually deploy to our dev staging and pre-prod environments. These are some screenshots from our visibility landscape. This image actually says what versions of our product are actually being used by a client or by a POC environment. This was really important for us because it helps us as a wider quality team to understand, okay, what backward compatibility, forward compatibility issues we need to look at, how many environments we need to spin up, how quickly can we spin them up, and what's the coverage like in each one of them. The second one, this is quite small but really impactful. We have a release calendar, and we actually have one for this year. Unfortunately, we're not in a position where we're releasing, say, every week or so. We release every month because we work with banks. Banks actually work quarterly. So we have these committed roadmap items. So this calendar actually shows us how many times we're going to do an internal release to our staging environment, and then our regression cycle week, and then our go live, and so on and so forth.
So this regression cycle, Maryam, that's not continuous delivery if you're having to do a week-long regression cycle.
It is not. The reason why we have this in place is that initially we started with exploratory testing, and it takes time, and luckily not buy-in, in my case, that you need to write automated tests. The idea is as that Uber spreadsheet of exploratory tests reduces, this cycle will also reduce, and we actually want to create our staging environments on demand. So the roadmap is that you have a test suite of automated tests for your smoke tests, which run every time there's a commit to trunk. And as soon as it's green, it automatically spins up a staging environment, runs those tests. We're happy with our post-merge tests, and we deploy. From a developer's perspective, we're very clear that the aim is that once I've committed my code, I should be so confident that I don't have to worry when it actually gets to the client. The last one, which is very important, as you get more and more clients, we can actually see which version of the product and which release candidate is in which environment and what date was it deployed to, was it deployed on. This, again, is really important for us to see, to do the types of testing are against our installer and so on and so forth, and it really helps us visualize where we are in terms of our releases. Next, my favorite, metrics. So when I came in, Lisa has this really great external support group, which I'm a part of. And I asked everybody that, OK, we need to put a number to that phrase, bad quality. How do we start? Where do we start? And everybody recommended your book, Accelerate, which is great. So some of the metrics I've extracted from there, some of them we will discuss here. I found it really useful. Some of the metrics I found were based on the feedback I was getting from our client services teams and our incident management teams.
So we don't have time to talk about all of these, but let's just talk about a few of them. Do you want to talk about test coverage, first of all?
Yeah. So whenever I use the word test coverage in front of engineers, they're always like, oh my God, here's a manager again asking for 100% coverage. It's not about 100% coverage. It's about efficient coverage. You want to make sure that the number of tests you have are actually covering the critical paths, for example. And the way we want to implement it is that we want the teams to start looking at, OK, where are we with our unit tests? Where are we with our integration tests? And eventually, functional coverage is what is most important. Something I'd just like to reiterate is that unit tests are really useful for developers because it tells them that they've not messed up when they write new features. But functional coverage is what really tells us that we're delivering features which the clients have asked for.
And you need both. People sometimes ask, well, have I got functional tests or I need unit tests? Yes, because ideally you want to be finding problems with your unit tests, not your functional tests. Anytime you have a functional test failure, you want to write a unit test failure to try and reproduce that, because then you can find the problem much more quickly, because triaging functional tests is much harder work than unit tests. So you need both of those things. The other thing about test coverage you've got to be careful of is 100% coverage doesn't mean that you've actually not got any defects, because you're only testing one initial state and one end state. There's obviously almost a very large number of initial and end states for anything that you're calling. So you only tested a tiny proportion of the state space of your application, even if you've got 100% coverage of the lines of code. MTTG. That's mean time to green. People often ask about metrics for continuous integration. I think the most important one is when the build fails, how long do you take to get it green again? So it can fail a lot, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with your build failing. That's giving you useful information. If your build never fails, it's probably not doing anything useful. The question is, how quickly can we get it green again? And then flaky tests.
Yeah, so flaky tests are as bad as no automated tests. So I used to write UI tests using Selenium. I hate writing UI tests. They're so flaky. And the confidence you want, the whole idea of writing automated tests is providing confidence. And as you write more and more tests, they do have this tendency to become flaky over time. So what we want to measure is how often with every build are we introducing flaky tests. And we have this role called an interrupt role in all of our engineering teams, i.e. the person who's interrupted when a flaky test is introduced by their team, because we have these YAML files which can actually identify what part of the code base belongs to which team, and it automatically flags it up. And there's a button in our CI system which you can click which says set flake, and it automatically creates a Jira ticket on their board, which is great. So the interrupt role immediately knows. But it's really important to keep an eye on how many flaky tests we're introducing as we're adding more features, because we want that number to go down.
All right, what's next?
More metrics.
And again, we don't have time to talk about all of these, but we want to talk about defects found via automation, via exploratory testing per feature.
Yeah. So I found this metric really important in one of my previous roles. I was in a team which was writing a lot of integration tests, and we had our in-house integration testing framework, but it was really complicated. And whilst quality was improving, everybody started saying, the stakeholders said that it's taking too long to deliver a feature. Again, what does too long mean? So what I did was I went away and looked at, OK, when were the tickets created to add those automation tests, give or take, let's say, a week or so. Then I looked at our repository and actually saw when the check-in happened for first automated tests and so on. And on average, for our 3 asset classes, we were spending 4 weeks just writing tests because the framework was so difficult to use. So I was like, okay, it is taking too long. How do we improve it? I was not going to be the person to say to the team, don't write automated tests. How do you get the team to say that we are going to write automated tests? So what I did was I presented this data to them, and they were like, okay, this is taking too long. Why don't we scrap writing integration tests and just rely on exploratory testing and unit tests? I was like, okay. The next diagram I showed to them was their unit test coverage, which was amazingly bad for a lot of packages. It was like 20%, 30%, really low. So you can't really rely on that either. The beauty of showing that metric to the team was that the developers turned around and they said, okay, we are going to write the first happy paths test, which means they're also improving the framework as they're writing that test, and the remaining tests were written by the remaining QA and SCTs in the team. And this really helped us. What I also measured was that the number of defects found by exploratory testing was quite high compared to number of defects being found by automation. And this was probably happening because the team was not getting time to actually think about the test scenarios, which is what a quality team does. All they were doing was spending time on writing these automated tests rather than trying to improve our coverage. And this is why one thing you really need to think about is that, are your tests actually helping you discover bugs automatically or not?
And this is one of the reasons why exploratory testing is so important. We didn't talk about it in our keynote yesterday, but I think we should have done. You've got to be doing exploratory testing all the time, because one of the points of exploratory testing is it helps you understand how good your automated tests are and whether they're actually reliable and whether they're actually finding defects.
Yeah. And as Lisa said yesterday, visualizing really, really helps. Here are some diagrams we created at Thought Machine. This is a diagram from September last year when we had our first 1,000 commits in the company, which is a big thing for a small startup. And the average time it took from inception to delivery of that build was 9 minutes. Now, the beauty of this graph is that we're still monitoring it, and we want to see that time not go up or go lower. And we definitely are having more than 1,000 commits a day now. The top graph actually shows how long it used to take us from check-in to deployment. Again, these are great metrics. It was taking us about 40 minutes from a build being committed to actually being deployed to our dev environment, which is really bad feedback loop. Our CEO actually launched a quality and reliability war in Q3 last year, where we were actually tossed. There was this whole Avengers theme thing and so on and so forth. And we were actually tasked on improving these metrics. Again, as Nicole just said a little while earlier, it's really important to start from something and then improve from there. And the last one, test greenness. The pre-prod one here is quite tricky because it's quite low, but it doesn't really matter for us because we are a client Vault is a client deployable product. We actually rely on the coverage in the client environments rather than our environments. We really use pre-prod only for replicating production incidents. Last one, this is a metric gone bad, which I think is really important. So I had this idea of, okay, with our integration tests versus defects, we want to see which team needs to focus more on test automation. But when I got these stats out, the green lines actually show you the number of defects and the blue lines show you the coverage. Okay, 25 defects in the accounts team, 2,000 tests that were being run. Not a problem, right? Not too big. The reason why I wanted to do this stat was because I wanted to see when we have a high number of defects and the coverage is low, okay, that team can focus more on quality, so that's how we can organize their sprints. And if there are a high number of defects and high coverage, then we've written the wrong tests in that team. But when I chalked this data gave me no information. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to look at what our functional coverage is for our end-to-end API tests and then map that with the defects. Great.
So we want to end by talking a little bit about the culture of building a metrics-driven organization. I really like this quote from Edward Deming. He says, "Wherever there is fear, you'll get the wrong figures." And if you're going to build a metrics-driven organization, you have to create psychological safety in your teams so they see metrics as a way to help them improve rather than as something that they're going to be beaten with. So how do you create psychological safety? And that story that Maryam told about gathering the metrics and showing the team and then having the team decide what to do, that's a symptom of a psychologically safe team. The fact that they were like, oh, how can we fix this problem? Not how can we make these metrics go away? Yeah. So what can you do? Firstly, psychological, we did some research at Google on how to build high-performing teams. We found that psychological safety was the most important factor in building high-performance teams. Our research program at Dora shows that the way you create psychological safety, or one of the ways you create it, is by implementing the practices we talk about, the continuous delivery practices, the lean management practices, the lean product development practices. Implementing those capabilities drives psychological safety. We also found that running retrospectives regularly improves psychological safety and organizational culture. We find that giving teams more autonomy creates trust and leads to people feeling they can speak up more, which is voice, and both of those things drive a safer culture as well. So there's a lot of things you can do to improve psychological safety, both in terms of your management practices and your technical practices. So a few key things about this. Number one, you've got to make sure that the team is involved in creating that initial vision. It can't be a top-down thing. No. They have to be involved in it. Number two, you've got to talk to teams when you're deciding what to measure, and they have to buy into the things that are getting measured. If metrics are forced on teams, what they'll do is they'll game them rather than caring about them. So teams have to be involved in deciding what to measure. The point of the testing team is not to be responsible for quality, but to make the quality of the system visible so that the team can decide what to do and what process improvement work to do to try and move those metrics. And again, part of that is teams setting their own targets. And then finally, when you measure stuff, as Maryam showed with that last set of metrics, you're going to measure some of the wrong things. And that's okay. You've got to get started, try measuring stuff, find the problems, and then change what you measure. There's no perfect set of metrics. The things that you are going to be doing to improve your software delivery performance are going to change over time as the things that work at your constraint are no longer your constraint, and the way you measure those things is going to change as well. So you've got to regularly retrospect, are we doing the right things? Are the things we're doing in terms of process improvement actually driving higher software delivery performance? Maybe not, then we should abandon them and do something else. Is the way we're measuring them the right way to measure them, or is it driving bad behaviors that we didn't expect? Maybe we should measure things differently as well, and that should be a team-based activity. So, to conclude, number one, quality is subjective. What you focus on in terms of quality depends on a lot of different factors. So making sure, as you did, you're asking all these questions from all these different stakeholders.
Yeah, and it's really important to understand that quality is a look and feel activity. What is high quality to me may not be high quality to you, and that's okay. Which is why it's really important to add numbers. We're all software engineers, well, most of us, and numbers mean more to us. Numbers actually get you the budget. Numbers actually get you the time to improve, and that's really what will help you create a better vision and help chalk the journey to better quality in a company. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
And then just a reminder to get us started. One of the questions that we like to start is what challenges are you facing in this area, especially within quality? Does anybody want to talk about that?
So one of the things that my company is facing with moving towards a continuous testing model is how much in testing should be done when you move progress from a dev to a QA to a pre-production to a post-production environment, because there are different test types to account for, right? But the goal is to improve the time to delivery. So how much is sufficient to do repetitively? But also keeping in mind that you keep reducing the time it takes to execute the testing for any environments as you go from left to right?
Somebody want to tackle that?
Sorry. So this is a classic testing problem, when to stop testing when you're writing automated tests. Parallelization is definitely something you should definitely look into. And also, don't write tests for things which are not delivering any value. Again, user journey-based tests are really useful. You can have your own version of the test pyramid. You don't have to follow something because it's written or practiced. What works for one organization may not work for yours, and you should be open and accepting to that. What I've found is that, yes, overnight tests and all of that, we've all done those nightly runs, but then who looks at those test results? There's actually a tool called Sapiens with a Z, which was developed at Facebook London. Actually, my professor who taught me software testing, the reason why I'm in the industry, his team developed this. And what that tool does is it automatically, when your tests are failing, it automatically goes and fixes the code. So something like that would be very novel. Also, things like mutation testing. Are your tests actually going to discover things which will fail? Are they testing the right things? It's really important to invest in innovative activities like that, and that will help you understand when to stop testing or how much testing to do.
My approach is to try and build the testing into the development process. And so the way in which Jez and I described it in the continuous delivery book, we talked about primarily two sets of tests, kind of developer-centered testing in the commit stage and user-centered testing in the acceptance test stage. And that seems like a minimum safe set to me. To get going. And the way that I like to practice that is I kind of do test first, test-driven development for the vast majority of my coding, and then I use the creation of executable specifications of the behavior of the system to drive my acceptance testing. So every user story has and every acceptance criteria on every user story has a minimum of one automated acceptance test as an executable specification. That means that I'm not kind of chasing coverage by numbers. I'm getting great coverage as a side effect of the way in which I approach development, and that gives me great feedback. The other thing that I want, I will tend and prefer to over-test, because parallelizing it all and throwing hardware at it is cheap comparing to optimizing to figure out which tests to run. So I like to just write thousands and thousands of tests, run them all, and get an answer back very quickly. And optimize for that on the whole. One more thing is, we're talking about overnight tests. My subjective impression is that there's a strong correlation between the rate with which you can get feedback and how easy it is to stay green. For teams that operate an overnight test run, my observation is that somewhere between 5 and 10% of their tests are always failing. And that's kind of obvious why, because if I commit a change that breaks something, I don't find out until the next day that it's broken, then it spends a day broken. And so it's really, really, really hard to stay on top of failures if you, so you need to bring it in within the same day, and you need to be able to evaluate those things very quickly.
Thank you, Dave. Actually, Jez, before we get to you, I believe we had...
I wanted to add to it, as we train some models continuously, and some talks about that, people are trained by this behavior as well. You come to at the morning, you see like out of thousands tests, a couple have failed, but they also failed yesterday, and now we are human trained to completely ignore them. But to original question, I can add a little bit. Some companies, Microsoft for example, don't have that very deep, thoughtful QA anymore. It's all a part of engineering, and while probably the right way to say is like, okay, we now, engineers do everything, I would say most of the important things are done by engineering. Some things are went away. I like the amount of detail these dedicated QA departments put into this thought. Like, unfortunately, we are so overburdened by features that we don't have time to go that deep. So I would say at some point, pragmatically, some things will have to be delegated somewhere. Maybe at some point, behavior of certain checkboxes in some UI that are usually not easily unit testable. Just login page takes minutes, to start. So you don't want to sometimes automate all that. So it might be easier to just delegate it to maybe some cheaper, than engineering effort, a vendor or something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one very quick point, which is that we found in our research that it's important that developers be able to reproduce test failures on their development workstations. That's critically important for that feedback loop from something failing to developers thinking, oh, I can fix that. Run the test. Here's the breakage. I can debug it and fix it locally. That's actually really, really important. And then secondly, like a meta thing about that talk, what I really loved was the way that Maryam put together this team whose job was to critique how well the engineering team was doing at quality, and not to tell them what to do, but to give them information on how they were doing. And that's what I see with a lot from teams that in the waterfall model would inspecting things to this kind of critique and governance role. It's the same with the CAB. It's not that the CAB necessarily goes away, but that they are providing feedback to the team on how well they're doing delivery and helping them improve.
Thank you, Jez. And we have about 1 minute left. Cora?
As an engineer, I've worked in a company where we had a dedicated QA department, and now I work with one where we don't. And I feel the difference because if I'm testing my own code, it's easy to test my own code, but I am thinking it from my point of view. And Cora's point of view, that code is perfect. And I do not see the edge cases. And someone else comes around and they look at it and they just, fresh perspective, they will see the flaws that I don't. And I'm like, oh, someone else just look at that and play with that, and you will try something I have not tried, and it's a human part. What we work on, we see. You gloss it over, as he said. It fails once, it's good. The thing's off by a pixel. My eyes just see that as perfect. Someone else comes and they say, "Oh, it's a pixel off," and that makes a difference when it adds up.
Great point. And does anybody have any final comments? Anything?
Just something I've noticed about the testing industry in general. It's getting really hard to, find good testers, but I think the future really is to encourage them to become domain experts of the areas they're working in, because then they will actually understand how that specific feature set works, and they can advise, and they can create really, really good test data and be on top of it, so they become the go-to people. That's why they need to be engaged earlier on in the process, do things like Three Amigos and all of that, which is really useful, and they actually feel like they're delivering great value to the team rather than feeling like, oh my God, I'm at the end of the food chain. I need to finish all my stories within 2 days, which the team took 10 days to develop, and so on and so forth. So I think that goal is really useful to have.
Thank you.
One more.
Yes, one more, Dave.
So I think it's a useful mean to think in terms of kind of quality coaches rather than quality gatekeepers. So the testing team are kind of advising best practice and the responsibilities.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much for being here. Let's give our speakers one more round of applause and our participants. Actually, that was longer than normal.
I think we have 10 more minutes.
Wait, you have until 11:20.
All right, we're back.
Gosh, I can't time keep. Everybody can come back up. We actually do have some more time for the discussion.
Yeah, that was the practice exit.
It was practice exercise. And now more people can come up and participate in the discussion if you like.
Phase 2 quality of discussion.
You're going for it.
Yeah.
Timekeeping and calendaring, very hard for me. Dave, you could even talk more. Well, we were really on a roll, and I'm sorry to interrupt that, but yeah, we do have more questions that we can talk about, but we don't have to stick to those questions.
Thank you first, actually.
It's okay. One thing I didn't want to just bring up regarding Cora's point about devs having one perspective on their code. one of the organizations that I used to work with did something called a Zoom code review, where everyone had to sit in on a Zoom call. And because we were a distributed team, everyone sat in and everyone went through the code line by line together, looking for what could go wrong. And the person who wrote the code had to sit there and explain every line, but they weren't allowed to drive. Someone else was scrolling through the code. And so all of the junior devs were encouraged to ask questions and note something that didn't go wrong. Senior devs were encouraged to mentor back. So it was a really great mentorship prospect, but also at the same time, it ensured a ton of quality, because at the same time, you're sitting there and saying, we're all going to look through this together. So QE was there, the devs were there, some ops folks sometimes came in, and it was just sitting there saying, let's find a way to make sure that none of this breaks so that we all aren't waking up at 3 a.m. to be on call.
I have a question to counter that. Whoever introduced that process, how many battles did they have to fight about, oh my God, we're going to slow down the code review process?
So he actually was specifically brought in to make us rethink how we do stuff. So he didn't have to fight any battles because we all loved him too much. So, and he also was Canadian, so he always was apologizing for everything. So I love you, Jay. You're awesome. But no, he didn't really actually have to fight any battles because we all understood that it was important. And the couple people who were a bit curmudgeonly got shouted down by the rest of us, as well as also saying that, hey, guess what? Do you want to be the person woken up at 3 a.m.? No? Then sit back down.
Maybe somewhat connected. I think you said that we were all on the same page. And my point is about that. It's super difficult problem for everybody to be on the same page. Probably like in smaller teams and smaller companies, it's easier. In large organizations with multiple people, as well as a lot of freedom being given, it's getting, like here is a ridiculous example. In my team, we had a certain quite bad bug delivered to production. And in retrospective, when we're trying to understand how it happened, it turned out that some people are enjoying this stress-free life of being able to deliver code because we have so many gates, we have so many tests, we have whatever blue-green stuff, which kind of didn't work, because there were some people who like, oh, I'm a developer. I'm going to invest 90% of my time into developing, and maybe I'll do some manual, and I don't want to bother with tests. So because not everybody was on the same page, this stress-free cycle did. So basically my question, or maybe proposal for ideas, how do we ensure that what we call common sense is actually shared by everybody, is actually common?
In response to that, answering the question of, how do you build common sense and get everything, one of the stories that I started with at Starbucks was helping an individual team, challenging them on their reliability engineering practices. And that assignment lasted for a year, year and a quarter, something like that. And the technology was fine. I was able to introduce that. But as far as better practices, as code reviews and everything, just wasn't making any progress. But separately, as I was transitioning out, we were transitioning a different team to help them with their engineering goals. And one of the processes they had was a quarterly business review of just taking metrics, presenting that as part of the management conversation. And one of the key stumbling personalities that was kind of blocking some of the better practices looked at this thing and is like, light bulbs lit up, and he says, yes, we have to go this way. So persistence is one of the harder things, but also challenging others and figuring out different ways to present this stuff and just keeping on coming back. It's like, we know what we're trying to do, but what are some different angles? How do we communicate? How do we challenge? Just different personalities to find that one way that actually does light people up. It's hard, but it works.
Just also to add that, like they said this morning in the panel, getting everybody in the same room and saying, hey, we're all humans, helps a ton with getting everybody to get some buy-in. And also at the same time, a little bit of group mob mentality also helps. So if everyone else is saying yes and one person is saying no, a lot of times that one person is encouraged gently to rethink their position.
Thank you. And then one more response, and we have another question coming up.
I'm not getting the last word again. Oh, shit. I'm starting to think of myself, I passed 60 last year, so I'm starting to think as an official grumpy old man. And one of the grumpy old manisms is that I don't think our industry is capable of learning. We don't discard any bad ideas. One of the most profound inventions during my career as a software developer was test-driven development. If you practice test-driven development, you eliminate, data suggests, something in the region of 70% of production defects. With just test-driven development, you forget all of the rest of the functional testing, exploratory testing, only TDD, technical practice, will eliminate something like 70% of the common sorts of defects that we all put into code in every language, in every development environment, off by one errors, scope errors, incorrect variable assignments, conditionals reversed, all of those sorts of common errors that we make, test-driven development eliminates. I think that I wish I knew the answer to your question. How do you flick a switch and make everybody realize that this is important? And I think that one of the ways that you do it is that you come and you talk at places like this and we all go away and we believe it and we start telling people that this stuff matters. It's not optional if you want to do world-class software. This is how you do it. We know how you do it. This is how you do it. So if you don't like doing it, tough. Figure out that's part of your job. Do a better job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maryam and Jez, for this talk. There was a mention of process in it. I know you didn't delve on it, but I couldn't help noticing that Jez picked on you a little bit, maybe playfully, on if it's a 1 week long thing, is it really continuous delivery? So let me join David. I'm a sprightly chicken, but let me join in that curmudgeonly old fellow thing and talk about why we cannot improve. Here's literally from Scaled Agile Framework's website, right? Continuous delivery, release train, and release trains are 8 to 12 weeks long. We don't hate people, right? This is not about people, but there are opinions that are solidly incompatible with everything we stand for. So can we please have at least a polite, respectful, but winner-take-all battle of ideas and rule some things out and go out and respectfully teach these people that this nonsense shall not stand. Because, and with respect, this everything for everybody mentality, I'm not sure that you were trying to imply that, but when Nicole picked up on that big circle with everything in it is going to lead to this. So some opinions are incompatible. Can we have a show of hands or at least get behind me on this rampaging battle of curmudgeonly old men or whatever? All genders welcome, by the way, and all ages too. But some ideas are incompatible, and we ought not to shy away from calling them as such.
So I just want to have it on record that I actually got into an email fight with Dean Leffingwell about release trains. So I actually emailed him and I'm like, this is... CC me on that, Al. Yeah, this is wrong, we shouldn't do it. And he wasn't having any of it. So I failed to change Dean Leffingwell's mind about release trains, so sorry. But yeah, I mean, that's why we do research, because some things are just wrong. And like knowing which things are trade-offs and which things are just wrong is like critically important. And like this is a problem with modern politics as well, with centrism, right? It's like, no, some things are just wrong. So yeah, I agree.
I'm a terrible facilitator and we're actually over, but I'd love to give Lisa is just begging. She's been waiting. So I'd like to give Lisa a chance. And remember, we've got the hallway track.
I win in this room for being the old curmudgeon, by the way. And I learned from an older curmudgeon, she just turned 77, I think, Linda Rising, that as humans, science has shown that we are not influenced by facts. And that disturbs me. You have all the facts, but that's not going to help. So how can we influence? Because we know facts don't work.
Better cookies.
Short response.
Okay, one more last response.
Nope. Oh, it's okay. I'd say I just read the book Crucial Conversations a month or so ago, and I thought that was an extremely good resource for having a more emotional-driven conversation, I think, and reconciling opinions. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. And actually, you can come up here and talk. We're just taking the mics away.